inevitably in our faith, we're going to have questions. Questions that we struggle to answer, whether they are asked by a non-believer because they genuinely want to know the answer, or because they're trying to catch us in a gotcha moment, or by believers who just maybe want to delve further into their faith, or even by those struggling to kind of enter the world of belief but can't really wrap their minds around these particular questions. And everybody questions their faith, and everybody wonders these things once in a great while, because we want to know more. We have this yearning to learn and to have a deeper connection to God. And sometimes these questions are real stumpers, and it kind of puts a little barrier between us and God when we can't answer something like that, or when somebody asks us this question and we don't know how to respond to them. So let me just briefly touch on these three big questions, and that is the question of free will, the question of, does God intervening and performing miracles actually take away our free will? And about God's omnipotence, and if he is truly all-knowing, does that mean that our lives are predestined? And if our lives are predestined, what does that mean about free will? And those are really, really good questions. And those are really, really tough questions. You know, like, if God intervenes because we prayed for him to, doesn't that take away the free will of someone else? I mean, not just ourselves, but if we pray to God and he performs a miracle, for example, if we really want a job and somebody else really wants that job and God performs a miracle and we get that job, doesn't he remove the free will of that other person who wanted that job? And then if God is all-knowing and knows what will happen in our lives before we do, doesn't that mean that our lives are predestined, which means we don't truly have free will? And a lot of people ask, if God gave us free will, why does he punish us for using it? For example, if we use our free will to sin, how is it free will if we get punished? If there are rules? If we have rules, are we really free? It's a very, very hard concept to understand. And I am not an apologist. A Catholic apologist is somebody who is an expert in Catholic theology. And I'm definitely not an expert by any means, but let me try to explain it to you the best way I can by kind of breaking it down into a few separate points. And we're going to start with free will. Now, this is the way that I understand it. And again, I'm not a Catholic apologist, so I am not a theological expert by any means, but this is kind of how I break it down in my mind. Free will is kind of misinterpreted. The main point of free will isn't do what you want, pick whatever you want for your life, no consequences, just go at it. The reason God gave us free will was because he wanted us to love him, but he did not want us to love him because we were programmed to. He wanted our love for him, and he wanted our worship to be 100% our choice. He wanted us to give ourselves freely and knowingly. He wants us to choose good rather than evil, but he wants it to be our choice. It's not meant to be a free-for-all. Even with God, there are consequences for your actions. You choose to sin, you must face the consequences. You choose to do wrong, you must face his punishment. It's like theft. Theft is an illegal act, and you don't have to choose to commit an act of theft. But because of free will, you have the freedom to make that decision. You have the freedom to choose to commit an illegal act. And if you get caught in the act of theft, or if you get caught after the fact as the person who committed the theft, you will go to jail. There is a punishment for the crime. You're free to make that choice to commit the crime. But that does not negate you from responsibility after the fact. It does not mean that you are not going to have to face the consequences for the decisions you make. Just as on the other side, somebody doesn't have to get involved if they know you committed the theft, but they can use their free will to report the theft and have you turned in, and they could be given a small reward for the good deed. Our choices, whether good or bad, are freely 100% ours to make, but they do have consequences. There are man-made laws, which are legal consequences, and then there are God's laws, which are moral consequences. So you have the free will to choose to do good or evil, to choose to love God or deny Him, but you have to remember that every choice you make, which is freely yours to make, does have a consequence. Just as there were consequences for Adam and Eve. They had free will to do whatever they wanted in the Garden of Eden. There was only one rule. Now, can you imagine that? We have so many rules for everything we do. All Adam and Eve had was one rule. Do not eat from the fruit of this one particular tree. Everything else was at their beck and call. Everything else was free. Everything else was go ahead. Just don't touch this one tree. They were free to touch it if they chose to. God didn't say, you know what, this might be too much of a temptation. I think I'm going to remove the tree, and then they don't have to worry about it. They don't have to make that choice. I will remove that free will to make the choice to disobey me. No, He left it there and said, you have the free will to either follow my rule, which is don't touch this, or to not follow my rules. They chose to disobey God, and they were free to do so, but they were punished for what they did. Much like someone who commits the act of theft will be punished for their act. So when it comes down to it, there are still rules, there are still laws. The main purpose of free will is more about our freedom to accept or reject God than it is if we have fish or steak for dinner. He gave us the free will to love Him or deny Him because He didn't want to be worshipped by force. He wants to be loved because we love Him. So now there are questions about miracles. Why does God intercede in certain situations? What if He helps someone get a job, as an example, because they prayed really hard about it and He felt like they needed that miracle? But doesn't that take away the free will of someone else vying for that job? Miracles are never made to the detriment of another person or to take away anyone's free will. Miracles are always made to remind us that God is here and He loves us. It's to show people the light, that there is more to this world than the hardships we face. It's a tap on the shoulder to try to turn His children back to Him after they've walked away. It's about hope. It's about love. You've probably heard the saying, everything happens for a reason. That's how miracles work. They're not meant to remove someone else's free will or to spurn one person for another. There is a purpose for all involved when God intervenes. That means there is a purpose that He's performing this miracle for this one particular woman and making sure that she gets the job. But then He has a purpose for the one who didn't get the job. If they maintain the faith, if they keep their faith in God, then another door will open for them. And maybe it'll turn out to be better for them that they didn't get this particular job because there's something better for them down the line. When a miracle happens, it never happens to the detriment of anybody involved, whether it's the person receiving the miracle or whether it's somebody else around that person, such as, again, someone vying for a job that somebody else wants. Both involved will have something good come out of it, as long as they keep the faith. So a miracle is never meant to overstep the boundaries of free will, and it's never meant to be to anyone's detriment. God doesn't want to take away our free will or put one person above another. God's miracles and intervention are His way of showing us His love. If He wanted to take away our free will, He'd constantly be intervening and forcing us to do what He knows is right. It would be like me standing in front of two doors, and He removes one of the doors so I don't have to choose which one to enter. I just do what He wanted because He made the choice for me. That was never God's way. That would be removing my free will. That would not be giving me the choice of which door I want to choose. So miracles have nothing to do with free will or overstepping that gift that He gave us. Of course, there is still that pesky little question about predestination, which is really hard. We all know that God is all-knowing. He knows the beginning, He knows the end. He knows what we are going to do before we even do it, is the common thinking. However, that's not really what I've gotten out of studying theology for as little as I've studied it thus far. I do think that God knows literally everything. He knows the moment that we're conceived, our right from our left. He knows all the outcomes of every move that we make. But it's still our choice to make. For example, back to the 2 doors I mentioned earlier. Let's say one is marked do not enter and the other is marked welcome. Now, because God is all-knowing, He knows if I step through one door, what will happen, and if I step through the other door, what's going to happen. He knows the outcome of both choices. But still, the choice is mine to make. We are still free to make our own choices and accept the consequences that follow. So God does know everything. He knows the outcome of both sides of the coins we toss, but still He lets us choose. So really, our lives are not predestined because we can still make the choices. It's like the Garden of Eden. He left the tree that they were not allowed to touch there in the garden. He did not make the choice for them. He let them choose to either obey Him or not. So even though He knew what would happen if they did, He knew they're going to get cast out, and generations after, all of those that follow them are going to be stained with original sin, and Jesus would have to come one day, and Jesus is going to have to die for the sins of many so that people can be redeemed. I mean, He knew all of that in advance, but He let it be their choice. Stay in paradise or everything else that follows by disobeying me. It was their choice to make. He knew what would happen based on whichever choice they made, but it was their choice to make. So really, when you think about it, it's a heavy responsibility to have free will. And it's very hard to understand at times, but that's really what faith is all about. Sometimes we're not going to understand things, and we just have to put our faith in God. We need to use the choices that we are given to be good people, to do good for others, help those in need, and love God with all our hearts, and remember how much He loves us. I hope it made these questions somewhat easier to understand. If you have any further questions, I do have an email now that you can email me, and perhaps I can discuss it on another episode, and it's traditionallycatholic@gmail.com. Thank you for listening, and God bless.